Welcome to another episode of Consumer Protection and You with Ryan Lippe. Today, Ryan's going to be looking at robocalls and those unwanted calls that we wish would not bother us. So stay tuned. Welcome back to another episode of Consumer Protection and You with Ryan Lippe. Ryan Lippe is a consumer educator with the State of Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost's office. Ryan, I keep on saying this. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be on here and talk to your viewers or communicate with your viewers. We've covered some really important topics, and I know this one is going to, if there were phone lines, they would light them up at this point, because we're going to be talking about the calls you love to hate, the robocalls, the unwanted calls, the sales pitches that you probably shouldn't be getting, especially if you're on the national do not call list. We're going to be talking about a lot of do's and don'ts about robocalls. But I guess the first thing we need to cover is, what is a robocall? A robocall is an auto-dialed call that delivers a pre-recorded message. You know, when you pick up the phone and you think it's a real person, but in reality, it's a computer that's just trying to sell you something or give you information. Now, not all robocalls are illegal and harmful. For instance, some automated calls remind us of going to the doctor's office. Some automated calls have to do with our child's school and weather-related information. Those are the kinds of calls we want. The illegal robocalls are calls that you've not consented to, that generally try to get you to pay for something or give away personal information. And by and far, over the years, the laws have tightened up where most robocalls are actually illegal. Whether or not you're on the do not call list, the robocalls, if they're auto-dialed, if they're coming to you as a pre-recorded message and you've not given your written consent, which I know most of your viewers have not, those calls are generally illegal. So I guess we can start out by giving the signs of an illegal robocall. As you might have detected through my description of legal and illegal robocalls, the illegal robocalls want you to act urgently. They want you to act quickly. The call might request that you press a number to speak with a representative or to unsubscribe. The caller might want payment through a wire transfer or a prepaid money card or gift card. And the call may be looking like it's from your area code. It may look like it's from your area, and they do that so that you pick up the phone. Now, they don't own those phone lines, most likely. They're using what's called caller ID spoofing. And that is a mechanism, technical element that you can put on your phone that helps you bypass caller ID and put whatever phone number you want the caller to see on their caller ID screen. So we are very much against how these scammers use the auto dialers, how they do their pre-recorded messages, and most importantly, how they hide the phone number they're calling from through caller ID spoofing. But the fact is, the cat's out of the bag. The technology is there. The scammers use it and use it quite well, unfortunately. So the next time you get a call that you don't recognize, but it's from your area code, most likely it's going to be one of those illegal robocalls. So our first piece of advice, and I'm going to give a lot of pieces of advice during this segment, but the first piece of advice is, if you don't recognize the number on your caller ID, just don't answer. It's really as simple as that. If you have voicemail, if you have an answering machine, those are tools in your arsenal to help control those robocalls. I say, probably the more robocalls you answer live, the more robocalls you're going to continue to get. They may have your phone number marked down as one that answers every phone call. That is a robocaller's dream. They want you to pick up the phone. And so they'll hide your caller, their true caller ID. They'll claim to be from a local area or claim to be from some important place like Washington, D.C., and they'll do whatever it takes for you to pick up that phone. And that's really the essence of the robocalls we see. I mean, we see millions of robocalls coming into Ohio just in terms of extended warranties for your automobile. You've probably, like me, gotten these calls saying that your warranty is expiring and you need to get some kind of warranty or service contract on your car. Consumers are sick of that. And we've taken some legal action along with other states to prosecute those that make those illegal robocalls. There's a lot of civil violations, heavy civil violations and enforcement penalties that have been imposed on some of these folks that are making the illegal robocalls. But there's a lot more of them out there, a lot more of them that we want to make sure don't get the opportunity to speak to you because their calls are illegal.
About 15, 20 years ago, we had call centers where they would call out asking for donations for veterans, or they would be trying to sell some things. Now, I rarely see any of those call centers.
Yeah, I mean, part of it may be because of the do not call law. Now, the do not call law went into effect roughly 20 years ago, and it allows all of us to sign up for the National Do Not Call Registry. It's 15, 20 years ago, something like that. Now, telemarketers are forbidden from calling those numbers that are on the do not call list unless they meet one of the exceptions. Now, the exceptions include if it's somebody you already do business with, if it's a charity, if it's a pollster, if it's a politician or political organization. Then you get into some of these free speech issues, and those aren't really considered sales calls and those types of exceptions. But beyond those limited exceptions, if you're on the do not call list, and if you signed up 15 years ago, you should still be on it unless you've changed phone numbers or taken yourself off the list or something like that. The do not call list is alive. The do not call list has led to some significant enforcement actions by especially federal regulators like the Federal Trade Commission. The one disturbing thought is that most of the calls we're getting aren't necessarily from businesses or from even legitimate telemarketers. They're from scammers. There are complete scammers out there that do nothing but call Americans and pretend that they're the IRS, or pretend that they're Amazon, or pretend that they're an antivirus company, or make all kinds of pitches about maybe an illegitimate charity or something like that. So there are a lot of scammers out there that don't care at all about the do not call law, because they're planning on violating plenty of other laws through their conversation with you. So the least of their worries is the do not call law. The legitimate telemarketers that have complied with the do not call law has led to a reduction in those legitimate sales calls, because really they shouldn't be calling anybody on that do not call list. So the ones getting through are either the rogue telemarketers, and there are a few of those that have gotten heavy fines, some of them, but then the other big group are scammers. So it's more likely than ever that if you're picking up the phone and it's a number you don't recognize, it's a scammer.
If I receive one of those calls, but I'm on a do not call list, where do I go from there? What do I do?
Couple of things you can do. First things first, they're probably violating the do not call law, especially if you've been on it a month or longer. So if you've been on it for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you need to go to donotcall.gov. That's donotcall.gov, or call 888-382-1222, and you can actually report the violator with as much information as you have about that phone call. Another thing you can do is report those unwanted calls to our office, the Ohio Attorney General's office. We have a robocall enforcement unit, and we're able to work with some of the phone companies and trade association to trace back some of the calls that have been plaguing Ohioans to figure out who the real culprit is. You know, the caller ID may say X, Y, and Z, but with phone companies' information and from your data that you yourself have compiled about the calls you've received, we may be able to figure out who's really calling you.
I continually get phone calls, but I have a blocker on my phone that gets rid of some of those calls. But sometimes they get through. So I do follow one of your suggestions, and that is, if I don't recognize the phone number, don't answer it. Let it go to voicemail.
Absolutely. And here's some other do's and don'ts in terms of being smart when it comes to robocalls. Now, the first one we already talked about is making sure you're registered on the do not call list. Again, do not call.gov is your tool that you can use to sign up. And you can have it for a home phone, you can have it for a cell phone. Any residential telephone customer can have their phone numbers added to the do not call list. And you can start reporting after you've been on it for about a month. Also, you want to research services offered by your phone provider to block unwanted calls. So there may be some tools out there. There may be call blocking mechanisms. There's sometimes privacy solutions that your phone provider itself may have that may or may not be advertised. So you want to have a good conversation with your own local phone company or cell phone carrier to find out if there are some solutions. Another tip is you want to think about installing a trusted and reliable app on your cell phone to block or at least warn of suspicious calls. Also, you want to add all the trusted phone numbers that you can think of, people you like, people that are related to you, work phone numbers, things like that. Add as many as possible to your contacts list on your cell phone. So then you know right away whether somebody is somebody you want to talk to or is an unknown entity, potentially a scammer. And certainly you want to limit the people and the businesses that you share your information with. Be frugal with your name and your phone number and things like that, because you never know exactly what's going to happen to that information. It could be an identity theft issue. It could be something less malicious, but equally an annoying in terms of just plaguing you with unwanted phone calls and robocalls. And sometimes they even try to get you to sign away your do not call rights to make an exception to the do not call law. So read terms and conditions, read privacy policies before letting anyone have your phone number with area code and things like that. So be frugal. Now I'm going to do some don'ts. Here's the things not to do when it comes with robocalls. First of all, as we mentioned, don't answer an incoming call when you don't recognize the number. That's the easiest solution. Also, you never want to provide financial or personal information over the phone. You never want to interact with the caller in any way. And that includes pressing numbers or pressing buttons to speak to a live representative or to put yourself on their do not call list. If it's a scammer, that's part of the scam. So don't push any phone numbers on your keypad if you've connected to a robocall. Never call back unfamiliar phone numbers. As we illustrated earlier, caller ID spoofing, you may be calling someone who's not expecting your phone call because they are victims as well, victims of caller ID spoofing. So if I see a phone call and it's I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and I get a 614 phone number, especially if it has my prefix for my cell phone number, I'm not going to answer that call. I'm going to let it go to voicemail, and certainly check your voicemail as often as you feel necessary. But you don't want to call back those unfamiliar numbers because it could be an unsuspecting local business. It could be a house with someone who never called you, or most likely it could be a disconnected number because the scammers are just going to use whatever old number they want you to see on your caller ID. And you certainly don't want to rely on caller ID all the time to think that you're identifying the culprit for the reasons we've already stated. You may be identifying, a small business or a residential home or a disconnected number that had no affiliation to trying to call you. They were just victims of a caller ID spoofing scam. So the big point of all this is if you don't know the number, don't answer it. And certainly we want people to check out their voicemails. We get older adults all the time are getting calls from doctors' offices and from specialists and folks that need to reach them, but may not come up that way on caller ID because you don't know what number they're going to be calling from. Some doctors' offices may have several phone lines. So keep by your phone, check your voicemail often, check your answering machine often. But if you see a phone number that's not familiar, let it go to voicemail. That a call screening that you can do by having an answering machine or having voicemail is very important to the whole process of trying to make sure robocallers are difficult to do business with Ohioans. We want lots of obstacles in their way so they quit calling us eventually.
Now we have heard that sometimes if we answer a phone number that we don't recognize and then quickly hang up, we possibly have identified ourselves as a live human being. Is that correct?
That's one of my concerns. That's one of our concerns at the Ohio Attorney General's office is if you're willing to answer the phone, especially if you're willing to press 9 to opt out or press 0 to talk to a live representative or whatever instructions they give you, you're telling them you're willing to answer your phone, you're telling them it's a live number, and you're telling them you're willing to follow their instructions. That's exactly playing into the hands of the robocallers that we want to get out of business.
We are under attack, if you want to call it that.
Well, some people are under more attack than others. I mean, people that have let their phone numbers escape all of their, people that give out their numbers readily, people that agree to let people call them in spite of the fact they're on the do not call list. They may be getting lots and lots of calls every day, unfortunately. And those of us that have been a little more frugal about getting our phone number out may be still getting a handful of robocalls every day. But, they're oftentimes targeting seniors during Medicare re-enrollment and things like that. So, over the winter season, fall and winter is prime time for getting phone calls that appear to be from Medicare or somebody offering to save you money on Medicare when if they're calling you and you're on the do not call list, that should tell you something right there about the legitimacy of their offer. If they're not willing to abide by that simple piece of information in your file, that being the do not call list that they have to by law check and make sure they don't call. If they're not willing to abide by that, what else are they going to do to try to make illegal, to do illegal actions that might harm you? So we just want to make sure that people out there know to beware of phone scams, beware of folks that claim to be from the government or from a popular online retailer or a tech support company, things like that. But, the sky's the limit. I mean, we get Medicare, Medicaid imposters. We get people impostoring the police department and the FBI. And, you see a lot of those messages in your spam folder, probably, and the email version of some of those scams. I mean, I don't think a day goes past where I don't get something that's supposedly from the United Nations or the CIA or the FBI when it's all just a bogus email campaign from scammers. Same thing can happen over the phone. Unfortunately, and this may give you a little background about why it's so bad, it's very, very affordable for a scammer to get a cheap phone with a cell phone plan that lets them make unlimited calls And it's very inexpensive these days. I mean, gone are the days where it costs, dollars to call per minute another country. I mean, these guys are calling us for pennies, and they're using caller ID spoofing technology that's readily available and cheap as well. I mean, you can have what they call a burner phone, a real basic cell phone, used to commit some do not call kinds of offenses for very little investment. You can get marketing lists for very little investment. You can get caller ID spoofing with very little investment. And there you go. You've got yourself the recipe for trying to scam me and you as Ohioans and as Americans. So it's really come down to the fact that the technology is dirt cheap. The technology is readily available. And even though the technology in many uses is illegal, the scammers don't care because they're hiding out usually in another country. We see a lot of scammers that they're in Jamaica, in other Caribbean countries. We see a lot of scammers in Nigeria and Ghana. A lot of these folks are not down the street like the caller ID may say they are. These scammers oftentimes are thousands of miles away, and education and us taking calls into our own hands by not answering the calls that you don't recognize are the tools that we have in our arsenal to try to stop the robocalls from happening. Enforcement's important as well. I mean, we are doing a lot in the state of Ohio to try to make Ohio the toughest state for robocallers to operate in. We're suing, we're getting judgments, we're going after small phone companies that nobody's ever heard of. We're going after the actual instigators, the folks that are making the phone calls, in some cases where we're able to trace back and find out who they are, or we get on multi-state initiatives with the Federal Trade Commission or through our other attorney general partners throughout the United States. We've had cases with a handful or maybe sometimes all of the states signing on trying to combat robocalls. So we're doing what we can on the legal end, and we want consumers to do what they can on their end of the phone in terms of trying to not answer those calls. And if you do answer and know that it's an unwanted call, report it to our office. And so we can be reached at www.ohioprotects.org. That's ohioprotects.org. And right now, coincidentally, that website is full of videos and other educational details of trying to teach you more information about robocalls, educational information about robocalls and how to stop them. Our toll-free number, if you need to report an unwanted call, is 800-282-0515. That's 800-282-0515. So if you get a phone call you don't like and you think it's a scam, if you get a text message you don't like and you think it's a scam, call our office. And if you think they are violating the do not call law, I want to give you that phone number and that website one more time. It's donotcall.gov. Pretty easy to remember. www.donotcall.gov. And the phone number for the do not call is 888-382-1222. That's 888-382-1222. So very important phone numbers for you to learn and to have in your memory so that you can report the calls and help do our share to stop the stem of, really stop those robocalls from perpetuating throughout the state of Ohio.
Usually in a household, you don't have just one cell phone. You have a cell phone for each member of the family after a certain age. When you put yourself on that do not call list, does every one of the phones have to also do the same thing?
I would recommend every phone that has a separate phone number to get onto that do not call list itself. Now, there's no automatic mechanism for the government to figure out where you moved to if you got a new phone number. It's not it's transferable only if you call up donotcall.gov and make sure they have your new cell phone number or have additional cell phone numbers that you've put in onto your plan. So if they don't have your number specifically for your cell phone, you may be getting more robocalls than you'd like to.
Let's suppose I can keep my phone number, but I switch carriers. I go from one phone service to the next. Will my number still stay be blocked?
It should, as long as you haven't changed the actual number itself. I've been with several carriers over the last 20, 30 years, and that do not call follows me wherever I go, thank goodness, so that I don't have to re-enroll with the do not call folks. But if you have any questions, if you have anything, if you're concerned and you don't remember whether your phone number is on the do not call list, you can simply call that 888 number from the phone you want to register or that you think is registered and figure out whether they have your details or not. Again, that number is 888-382-1222, or just simply go to www.donotcall.gov.
As a consumer educator, you get a chance to go throughout Ohio educating the population. Is there a cost to this?
Absolutely not. There's no fee to have us come into a community and give a very good presentation on consumer scams or identity theft or cybersecurity. You can call us toll free or go to our website and find out about getting a speaker for your organization or church group or whatever the case is. If you've got 20 or more people, we can travel to do a presentation for your organization. And if you don't have 20 or more people, we can do it virtually. And there's no cost at all for either way. If you want to do it in person and we're driving 3 hours each way, we'll do it for 20 or more people, provided we can in our schedule. We've got 3 consumer educators on staff. We all go statewide, and we all look forward to protecting you and giving you good educational information by coming into your community and giving a presentation.
Hey, we're talking with Ryan Lippe. Ryan Lippe is a consumer educator with the State of Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost office. Ryan, great information. I really appreciate your coming on and sharing that information with us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the opportunity. And anybody that wants to reach us here at the Attorney General's office, ohioprotects.org or 800-282-0515. Thanks so much, Patrick.
Thank you.